Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the admission, transfer, and discharge process. We have posted the faculty guide for this information on Blackboard, so it's all filled in. You had most of the information on your own PowerPoints, but I'm going to just do a little illustration so that you can get a better understanding of what it looks like from a nurse's standpoint, all of the jobs that the nurse has to do when we admit someone, when we transfer them, and when they get discharged finally. All right, here we go. Okay, so we're going to start with the admission process. And as you can see, I built a hospital, and this will help illustrate what's happening with the admission process. So we're going to zoom in on Nurse Judy. All right, Nurse Judy is going to be working with a patient that just got admitted or is in the process of getting admitted. They are coming in with a medical problem. We're going to just leave it at that, not be specific about the issue they have. But there's a lot of information that Nurse Judy is going to be asking of the patient and the family. So in your guide and your PowerPoints, you had a lot of this listed for you, so I don't want to relist it. But one of the most important things to think about is the fact that discharge starts on admission, which sounds kind of goofy, but we really need to know when this patient is well enough, where are they going to go? Are they going to be able to leave? Because if they live alone and they live on a second-story apartment with 2 flights of stairs and they don't have anyone that can get their groceries and they came in with a broken leg, we need to have that factored into the whole planning process. And as the nurse, I gather that data in the beginning of my assessment. I can then alert appropriate people, such as social work, who could help them figure out transportation, or they could contact relatives to see if they're able to assist them, or they might have to end up not going home when they're ready to leave the hospital. They might have to go to a long-term care facility or a rehab facility. So we need to know right off the bat, what is the home situation like? So that is part of our data collection. The other information you guys have gone through in class, we've obviously done our objective assessment, physical assessment, gathering vital signs. They'll be collecting blood, getting lab values. We're going to be also looking for documentation about their wishes, such as any DNR or patient advocate forms, legal forms like that. So those are some things that we'll be getting. We're also going to make sure that if they have medications they take regularly at home, we know what they are. That's called medication reconciliation. So we need to get a list of their meds at home, and we need to know when they last took them, and that has to be information that the provider is going to be aware of. So there's a lot of different things that we're collecting data on in order to get them safely admitted to the hospital. The provider is going to be looking at that data, so we want to make sure it's accurate. Now think about if your patient's confused. Who are you going to get that data from? You're going to be getting it hopefully from a family member, right? If they are being admitted from another facility, say they were in a long-term care facility and that's where they've been living for years and they got really sick and got sent to the hospital, we would get that information from the long-term care facility. We'd have to contact the nurse and find out what was going on with the patient and get their history from them. All right, so that's step 1, is gathering all the data, and we'd be inputting it into the computer and getting the patient ready for their hospital stay and anticipating orders. The doctor's going to start feeding orders, mobility, medications, IV fluids, etc. So we're going to be checking allergies, lots and lots of questions. There's a whole form that you'd be filling out. We'd be making sure the patient has the proper ID band on, which they usually come right from the admission office or the emergency room with that on, but we want to make sure they have that in place. So a lot of questions we're going to ask the patient and or the family. Remember HIPAA. We have to make sure if a family member's in the room that we're making sure it's okay with the patient, that that family member is aware of this conversation before we start asking questions. All right, so that's phase one. All right, so then we want to talk about transferring a patient. So we can transfer a patient within the healthcare facility that we're at, or we may be transferring them to a completely different facility. So if we're transferring them within the building, within the hospital, it's usually for two reasons. Either they're getting better and they need a less acute unit, or they're getting worse and they need a more acute unit or a specialized unit. So most hospitals nowadays have specialty units so that if you have patients with a specific respiratory problem, they'll be admitted to the respiratory unit where the nurses and staff are specially trained on how to deal with all respiratory problems and issues. Same with cardiac or heart problems. They're going to go to a special heart unit. So we're going to say that our gentleman got admitted. He was on our general med-surg floor and he developed some heart problems, and they're very specific, and the physician wants him to be on the cardiac floor where he can be better monitored. So I'm going to have to transfer him to that unit. So I'm going to be doing a bunch of things. Number one, I'm going to be gathering up all his belongings and making sure they're all going with the patient. Any medications that he may have had that are going to be due, like say he was going to get an IV medication at 2 o'clock and it's noon, we're going to want to send that with him so that we hand that to the nurse that's going to take care of him, so they're not looking for it at 2 and they can't get it till later in the day. So we're going to send everything with him that he needs. We don't need to send paper copies of charts within hospitals. We have electronic medical records. But we are going to have to phone the nurse on the unit that the patient's going to, and we're going to have to talk directly to them and give them a report. So a very comprehensive report, why the patient was admitted, when, what labs have been done, tests, etc. And we're going to have to ensure that they have all that information and make sure they're ready to accept the patient up to their unit. So we're going to be going from unit 100 and we're going to move up to unit 200, the specialty cardiac. All right, so we've gathered all his belongings. We're going to take him right in his bed because he's really not feeling good. He's got these heart issues. So we're going to wheel him, his belongings, his bed, any medications, anything else that needs to go. I've already called report to the nurse upstairs, so they're expecting him. So we're going to just wheel the whole bed. We're going to go in the elevator, right? Hi, all the people that are watching, hanging out. Okay, so here we are on the second floor. We're going to wheel him, and the nurse has already nicely cleared out a spot, which is fantastic. We let the nurse know that we were going to bring the whole bed up, so they moved their bed out in the hall. This made it easier. And now the nurse already got report and is going to come in and do their assessment. They have to accept this patient on, document the time they arrived. They're going to do a head-to-toe assessment, collect vital signs, review the orders, and get started with all of their care. Let's say the patient was actually going to be transferred to a rehab facility instead of going just within a unit. They're better, but they're not good enough to go home yet. So they're going to be transferred to a rehabilitation center. It's kind of like our long-term care facilities where we've been, but when they're in a rehab unit, they get extra services like physical therapy comes frequently, occupational therapy, in order to try to build up their strength and their abilities so that they can go home. So that's the point of a rehab facility. So we'll say our gentleman was transferred to a rehab facility. We would have our social worker, or there's another person on the unit called a care manager that manages different aspects of patients' care. They don't take care of patients. They're looking at all the other facets of what's happening with the hospitalization. But them and the social worker can make arrangements for transportation by some type of ambulance or medical cab or vehicle. And just like us calling report to the other unit, we're going to call report to the facility. So if they went to one of the facilities we were at for our clinicals this semester, and they need to call a report to the rehab unit there, they would call, get a hold of the nurse that's going to be accepting the patient and give them the exact same report, why they were admitted, when they arrived, all that transpired during their admission, and what they're looking like at this point with their vitals and medications, etc. And then again, we pack up everything, make sure they have everything they need. If the facility they were going to was not on electronic medical records or did not use the same electronic system, we would have to have our secretary or the social worker or care manager would get copies of all the charting that needed to go with them, and that would be sent in a secure sealed envelope with the patient and handed to the staff when they arrived at the new facility. Okay, so our patient's been doing well. He's feeling great. His labs have gotten better. The doctor feels the medications are working. He's got enough strength. He's ready to go home. So the physician or the provider is going to be writing some discharge orders. So those are going to include things like medications that the patient will be taking at home, any restrictions or anything they're allowed to or not do when they get home, when to follow up with them or any other doctors that have been involved in their care. All that information is going to be put into a discharge plan. And as the nurse doing the discharge, you will be responsible to read through that discharge plan with the patient. They may want their family member there to hear all the information, and then you're going to be handing them all the paperwork. You're going to go through all the medications that they're going to be going home on, and you're going to indicate on the paperwork whether they've had those medications already today and when the next time it's due. You're going to be removing any medical devices like any IV lines, anything like that they shouldn't be going home with. And you're going to help them pack up. And when their ride comes, you're going to get them out to their car and have them sign their discharge paperwork before you get them out to the car. And they'll be good to go. And you want to just review with them again when they're following up with their provider and what else they should or shouldn't be doing when they get home. Okay, so then we have wheeled our patient in the wheelchair down to the discharge area of the hospital, or if they're stable enough, we'll send our patient care tech. Patients should be stable if they're going home, right? But we're going to have one of us is going to wheel the patient down. We don't let them walk down. It's a liability for the hospital in case something happened and they fell on the way. So we're going to wheel them down to the discharge area. Their family members down there waiting, and we're going to help them get in their car, make sure they don't have any other questions, and then they're going to drive off and go home to their waiting family members. Yay! All right. And that was our admission, transfer, and discharge illustration with some absolutely unnecessary toys involved. Yay!